All right, so good morning, everybody. Let's continue our discussion. So today we are going to talk about ecosystem component. What is the ecosystem component? And then we will move forward and we'll start picking up, all the ecosystem component one by one. Okay. So as we all know, the very initial Hadoop, what came to the market had only two things: MapReduce and SDFS, right? And SDFS is basically used to store the data, and MapReduce is used to process the data. But then it was really difficult for all the folks to get acquainted with Hadoop MapReduce framework, because writing Java code, for processing big data was very difficult. When you want to really process a lot of data, you end up writing multiple MapReduce programs, running them in a sequence one by one, and that was really a nightmare. Okay, so in the meanwhile, the industry had a lot of folks who were into data warehousing, who were into some other, platform, and they also wanted to use this powerful, feature of this Hadoop, big data Hadoop, right? So what they were actually thinking is, can we have something which can make our life much more easy, right? And then people started coming up with a concept called ecosystem component, which are basically one or other tools to make our life much more easy, right? To make our life much more easy in terms of this big data. Okay, so I would say ecosystem component are introduced to make our life much more easy, so that you don't end up writing a big map reduce code to manage and work with the big data. Okay, so some of the ecosystem component, what you can see is, you'll see Hive, right? You'll see HBase, you'll see 𝗚ģi, okay? You'll see Scoop, okay? You'll see Kafka, you will see Flume, okay? You'll see Cassandra, okay? You'll see many more, like you have one more, Tika, okay, and there are so many other products. Okay, so there are so many such products which are basically created to make our life much more easier. Okay, now now there are so many products that it is, like it will be very confusing what to study and what not to study, right? Because it depends from use case to use case. Few company may prefer using HBase, few company may prefer using Cassandra, right? Like depending on their own choice, right? So now you have, like uh, you have 𝗚ซี้, you also have something called Airflow, right? So, like this, there are so many other alternatives these days, and it is completely up to the use case. It is completely up to the company, what project they have been working with, and they may prefer choosing one or other, right? So we will basically focusing, as part of this course DE1, we'll be working on this four, right? We'll be working on this four as part of the DE1, data engineering one, okay? And Cassandra and HBase are similar, which means given a knowledge of HBase, with little bit knowledge, you can also scale up yourself into Cassandra. Tika is basically a framework where you can work with the third-party library files like PDF file, Word files, and all. Flume can be used to collect data from logs. Okay, for example, I have a system where it emits a lot of data into a log file, and I really want to capture those data from log into SDFS, and then do some processing with those data. Those can also be done, with something called Elasticsearch Filebit and Logstats. Okay, so you'll be understanding this concept in our data engineering 2 course. Okay, but right now we are limited to these 4 components, mostly in detail. Okay, so that's what we have in part of ecosystem component. So as part of the ecosystem component, you'll see a lot of other tools. Okay, there are so many tools which are basically introduced to work with the like big data stuff, right? So you also have something called Mahout, and so on, right? So there are so many other tools. If you open, if you go back and check, you will be surprised to see most of these tools are actually from Apache. Okay, most of the tools are basically from Apache, and they are maintained by Apache Software Foundation. Okay. Now I would also like to tell you one thing here. Okay, I would also like to tell you here that Apache, like, see, Apache is an open source community, right? Which means they provide you the software for free. Okay, but it does not mean that the developers at Apache they work for free. It's not possible, right? Because at the end of the day, they also have a family to feed. So what people are actually doing, there is a concept called distributions. Okay, and what is this distribution? Distributions are those companies who actually take this free software, okay, fine tune it and sell it to the customer. For example, you have Cloudera, you have Hortonworks, right? They are of course merged together. Now you have Greenplum, okay, you have MapR, you have Databricks, and so on. So these companies are called as distributions, right? And why are they called as distributions? Because what they do is they get all this free software from Apache, okay, and then they have hired their own team of developers, right, who actually work on all the bug fixes and all. They groom, these softwares, and then they sell it to their customers, right? So each of these framework, each of these distributions have their own advantage and disadvantage, but from development point of view, it will really not matter a lot. From a development point of view, this will really not matter a lot, because at the end of the day, the code what you write to let's say solve your word count problem in Apache Hadoop and your Cloudera Hadoop or Databricks Hadoop or any Hadoop will remain same. Okay, so these are just, you can say, the platform, right? The platform can be different. Platform will come with their own features, own fine-tuning approach. For example, I would say when I was working with this MapR, by default MapR said my default block size would be 256, where the whole company was using 128, right? Something like that. So they have their own advantages and disadvantages, right? So most popular, what you can see in companies, Cloudera, of course, and Databricks is also, gaining popularities in MapR. So if you ask me to, like rank them, so I would say one, okay, I can say two, and I can say three, right? So this is how I would basically be able to rank them based on the popularity. But as I have told you, as a big data developer, it really does not matter, right? So during my 8 years of experience in big data, I have never seen people rejecting at least me because I don't know, like, how do I work on Greenplum or how do I work on Mapper, right? So they are all distributions which can be learned in a fraction of time, because as a developer, your job is to write a code, right? And then you'll just have environment differences, right? And the jar file differences and all, which can be always figured out and worked upon, right? So that's how it is. So I hope you understood the concept of ecosystem component. What are basically the popular ecosystem components, and what do you mean by distributions, right? And these distributions are basically investing a lot of money back to the Apache, because otherwise how do they pay salary to their employees, right? So that's how you get a lot of that's how Apache gets a lot of revenue, and that's how they basically support the developer. Okay, now you might have seen when you are working with these distributions, they come with a certification, right? So you can go ahead and write a certification for Cloudera. Like in Cloudera, you have something like a 𝗚𝗏𝗴𝗏 175, Okay, you have hot and work certification, you have all Databricks certification and all, but at the end of the day, like, you do any certification, everything would be okay. Like, people will not reject you just because you are not certified in this particular distributions, and you are certified in this particular distributions. So more or less they are all same, but you just have to go to the syllabus. The syllabus would be different, and according to the syllabus you can pick up any certification if you want to write one. Okay, all right. Now there's a question, where is the Spark over here? Yes, you can also put the Spark, because now I would say that is also part of the ecosystem component. So I would say Spark and all the modules are there to process your big data stuff. Okay, so that can also be counted as an ecosystem component, because at the end of the day it's a big data processing tool, right? So altogether, what I'm trying to convince you here is there are so many things, and trust me, when I started my journey on big data, and when I saw there is Hive, there is 𝗚𝗏, there is this, there is that, and I was like, oh my god, these many things I'll have to learn, right? But at the end of the day I realized that they are all meant for a different purpose, right? So by the end of this data engineering one course, you will be able to justify when to use what and when not to use what. Okay, so we will go through all these four ecosystem component in a very deep manner. We'll learn everything possible, every possible thing that a developer does, right, with the practical, and then we should be able to convince ourselves, okay, this is the use case I must pick up Hive, or this is the use case I must pick up 𝗚𝗏, or and so on, right? So let's move on, guys. With I will not talk much about this right now, but let me just give you some hint about the top four which we are going to use, so that when we start working on it, we should be very clear why exactly are we using this. Now, Hive. Hive is basically a data warehousing kind of tool or ecosystem component, wherein you will be writing SQL queries. Okay, and this SQL query will be converted to a map reduce job. Okay, you have the concept of tables. You can create a table and you can store the data in your Hive permanently, right? HBase. HBase is basically also a kind of database, okay? Not exactly, but it can store the data. It can store unstructured kind of data. Okay, it can store unstructured kind of data, and they are basically a column family based database. Okay, we'll talk about that in the coming days, what exactly is the meaning of column family database. 𝗚𝗏 is basically a scheduler. Airflow is basically a scheduler which can be used to schedule your job. For example, you may say, hey, I have written a MapReduce program and I want that MapReduce program to run daily at 7 o'clock, right? And I really don't want to get up early at the morning just to run a job. Is there any way I can automate this process? You can use 𝗚𝗏, you can use Airflow, right? 𝗚𝗏. 𝗚𝗏 can be used when you have a requirement of, you have a data in your database, any traditional RDBMS systems, and you want to bring that data to SDFS. Okay, so 𝗚𝗏 can be used to bring the data from database to SDFS and vice versa. Okay, sometimes there could be a requirement like daily a lot of transaction is happening on a particular banking application, right? So let's say Citibank, or let's say ICICI Bank, right? Daily there are one other transactions happening, and what we want is every day I want to do some analysis on yesterday's transaction. For example, find out all the customers who has done a transaction of more than 20,000 or maybe more than 30,000, and fetch their details from some other system, get their information like mobile number, right, email ID, send it to the customer care executives so that they can call you. Sir, we have seen that you have recently done a transaction of 20,000 rupees. Do you want to convert that in an EMI? We are giving you EMI at lower interest. You might have received some sort of call sometime, right? And this is all because of this data analysis, right? So they They have a capability to fetch all the data of your yesterday's transactions, and like schedule a call if your transaction value, the transaction amount exceeds 20,000, 30,000, and so on, something like that, right? So in that case, what they do is they have a capability to get the data from the database into maybe SDFS kind of, right? And then they do some analysis on top of it, right? So not necessarily they would be using SDFS, they would be using Scoop, they might be using some other tool as well. But I'm just giving you a use case where can this be used. Okay, so this is all I wanted to talk about the ecosystem component. Now, while we are practicing, okay, so while we are practicing, we have installed VMware. Let me change my pen, sorry for that. While we are using ecosystem component, right, while we are using, while we are learning this Hadoop, we would have a Ubuntu system, okay, Ubuntu system, wherein we will install like Hadoop, okay, and then we'll start installing all these components: Hive, Scoop, HBase, and so on. Okay, now we'll also be doing the same thing on a Cloudera virtual machine. Okay, so there is an update. Earlier, this Cloudera guys used to provide you a VMware, okay, which you can download and practice. But these days, these guys have stopped giving you that. Okay, and they are saying we will now give you all those things in cloud, right? Which means if you can install it and try it, then you will be able to take the advantage of learning the cloud, right? So that is really a good news now. So they will give you 60 days of trial, right? And then once you sign up with all the information, you can access the cloud, and then you can start practicing. Like, and what do they do? You know, this Cloudera, they will give you a system in such a way that everything is set up here. Everything is set up here properly, which means you really don't have to take a lot of pain installing this Hadoop, Java, Scoop, HBase, and so on all together, right? So it is really good news that we will be able to work on the cloud immediately. Is not it? So what I'll do is I'll give you a cloud VM. I have the cloud VM. Okay, I'll give you that cloud VM through my Dropbox, and we will sign up to this, and then slowly we will start practicing all this component whatever we can, right? So Cloudera, they have created an environment for us where they've all taken the pain of installing Hadoop and everything out, and we can just use it. Okay, but you may ask me, why are we still learning this approach? Why are we not directly moving into Cloudera, right? Because I don't want you to just practice the code somewhere, right? I want you to build everything from scratch, because that will be more fun. And trust me, like, you never know your destination. Today you are working on a top MNCs, right? Multinational companies. You're working on service-based companies. You're working on great product-based companies. Tomorrow you may be offered a very good salary in a startup, and you may not register to say no to it because they are giving you really good salary tomorrow, possibly, right? Now in startup, they expect you that you have some knowledge about this, right? For example, when I was working on my previous company, I was the only guy who brought Elasticsearch to the company because I had worked on that particular tool in 2 3 companies already, right? So I said, hey boss, I can understand the requirement, but I feel Elasticsearch can be the best guy solving our problem, right? And then they agreed ultimately, and I was the guy who had to take care of creating an installation document of Elasticsearch in production, right? Now the DBA who was working with us, right, they will have no clue because they have never done it. It's not it. So likewise, if we learn all these things right now, if we start installing all these things right now, we will have a more better edge when we work on startups where they say, hey, I want to learn something. Hey, you have to set up this also. Let us try to do some setup manually. Okay. All right. So yeah, so this is all about the ecosystem component, but I am not saying you that this is the only list. There is an exclusive list of the ecosystem component. Let me show you that. I'll just share my screen now. So look into this data, look into this document wherein I have like specified some of the ecosystem component which you may come across. Okay, but not necessarily you will be using all of them. They are used for different purpose. So pig was quite popular earlier, but we have to say tata bye bye to pig because they are no more used anytime. Okay, so so there are so many things, like somebody asked me, hey, where is zookeeper? You can also put zookeeper over there, right? So I've listed down around 15 such ecosystem component where I think I have not mentioned Spark and the other components, but yes, they are all basically a part of the ecosystem component. Okay, now I've already told you what exactly is the ecosystem component. Why should you use ecosystem component, right? Why not writing the map reduce job alone, right? So like as I've told you, not everybody would be expert in Java, and you cannot expect everybody to write it for you. Okay, now yeah, so as I've told you that Cloudera is what we are going to use. I'll give you the virtual machine. Okay, and as well as we will gradually move ourselves to the cloud so that we have a taste of everything out. Okay,